Welcome back to the channel. I have done a summer internship as a programmer for about a month right now, and I have gone through the trials and tribulations of starting my first coding job. And in this video I've distilled everything I've learned during my first month, and I'm gonna give it to you for free right now so that you will have all information you need to make your first coding job as good as possible. I've also got my notes down here, which is all the things I'm gonna go through with you today. I needed to keep some structure into this, and the first thing we're going to talk about in this guide is the first day. And I was gonna tell you a little bit about my first day as a programmer. It wasn't long ago, it was about 4 weeks ago, and I was told to come in at 10:30, and so I made sure I was really early, and I arrived at the office at about 9:50, and I just sat outside and waited until about 10:30 to make sure that I would make a good first impression. And I was let in at 10:30. I got my own desk, I got my computer set up, I was speaking to the people that would take care of me, the boss and also a couple of colleagues, and then I was shown around the office. Here's the coffee, here's the fruits, here's the kitchen, that kind of thing that everyone goes through at their first job. And then I was tasked with reading onboarding materials, which was like cybersecurity policies, behavior policies, a little bit about what the company actually does and that kind of thing. And I spent about 3 or 4 hours reading onboarding material. And this is quite a small organization as well. So if your first job is at a big company, you may spend the entire first day or maybe multiple days doing an onboarding process where they teach you about the company and how things work at the company and that kind of thing. Whereas if you'll be working at a small company like I do, the onboarding process, the actual structured onboarding process will be a bit shorter, and you'll have to sort of learn as you go, making multiple mistakes along the way. And that's one of the things I like about working for a smaller company, is that it's learn as you go and you sort of forge your own path through the company essentially. Anyways, after onboarding myself for a couple of hours, it was about to have lunch, and I put an actual effort into having lunch when everyone else was having lunch so that I could speak to as many people as possible and integrate into the company so that I became known, liked and trusted by the colleagues, because that's actually just as important as the amount of work we do. Because how valuable is the work we do if no one actually knows, likes or trusts us? And that's my first piece of advice and I got this from my dad, and he was completely right. And he told me to really put some effort into getting to know your colleagues, particularly during the first week, because the first week, the beginning, is all about socializing. And then once you know everyone, it's easy, and it's way easier for you to ask questions if you know someone than if you kind of know them, you've seen them around the office. Now in my office we're only about 8 or 9 people, so it's quite easy, quite quick to get to know everyone. And if you work in a bigger company, make sure you get to know your department as much as possible, because building the relationships early on is very important. Anyways, after having this very socializing lunch, it was back to the desk and I was actually starting programming. Now for that day, I only had about 4 or 5 hours left that day, and I was tasked to maintain and update and pretty much revamp an internal application the company uses. And that basically involved reading this 10-year-old, 11-year-old code base, trying to understand what the original developers 10 years ago wrote, and then preparing myself mentally for actually restructuring this, improving this, adding features. And during my first day, at the last hour before I went home, I actually wrote a little bit of code. So if you're working for a small company, you may actually have time to get started during your first day. I wrote a little bit and then I got home at 6, which means that I was only effectively working for 7 hours that day, because I was very tired. And that's, you need to be prepared to be tired after the first day and the first week, because it's always like that when we start new jobs. It's difficult, it's new, lots of impressions, particularly the people. Getting to know a lot of people probably drains us coders because we're actually introverted and like sticking to ourselves. But looking back at my first week, when I put so much effort into getting to know everyone, is so valuable, because now I've created some actual real friends at the office and I get along so well with everyone. And I'm very grateful for my dad's advice on how to actually getting to know people at the office. So important. So make sure you do that. On your first day, there are 2 things you should do. The first one is the onboarding process, which I talked to you about, which may take half a day or a full day. And also obviously to make a good impression. It is so important. I've told you it multiple times over. I've even told you a story about it. So I'm trying to get that point across because it's so important, so valuable. Now there are a couple things that are good to do during your first day, and that would be to try to understand the company culture, understand how they work, ask 2 questions. Ask about how they use Git, version control, and also ask about documentation so that you know that early on. Because version control and documentation was something I learned quite far after a couple of weeks, and those are things that are useful to know before you actually start your first coding job. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Git, version control, and documentation in the coding world, then Google those concepts and learn them, because they will be very valuable if you're becoming a developer. Hey Ruby? Also, when you've understood and put some effort into trying to understand the company culture, adapt to it, integrate into it, try to do what others do, particularly in the beginning, but also bring your own personality into it as well, particularly if it's a small company. You should not be a shell of your normal self, like be yourself, but also adapt and integrate into the company, and it will be smooth sailing onwards. Another thing I would do during the first day would be to ask some questions about the tech stack. And the tech stack, if you're unfamiliar with it, is the programming languages, the tools, the things that the company use to develop their programs. It could be Java, Python, C++, SQL, that kind of thing. So ask around a little bit, see what the software engineers at the company uses and how they develop things, and do things the same way. Need to let the cat out. I'm currently house sitting at my mom's house, and the cats are sort of a benefit because now I actually get some company compared to living alone back in my shipping container, and I get to borrow her microphone. Anyways, that's kind of off topic. Where were we? Oh yeah, so after you've survived your first day, it's time to actually settle into the company, and what's important to do here is to really put some effort into understanding the company and how they work. Ideally, you should sit down and watch someone else code for a little bit, ask them how they normally approach issues, how they name their variables, how they recommend you to solve the problem, because, well, if you're new, literally everyone else is more experienced, so talk to them, interact with them, and see how they can help you. The way we work as professional coders is very different from the way we work in school and university and that kind of thing, and also it's very different from how we work on our own hobby projects. There are a lot of things that differs when we program professionally. For example, every single line of code you write has to be reviewed and sort of inspected and tested by someone else. So you'll be quite a lot slower when you're programming for a professional company, but the quality will also be higher, and you won't end up making broken code because someone else will tell you off for it. So be mentally prepared that things will be different, but they're good. I like it. I thought I would only like the sort of freedom of being a hobby programmer, but I actually really like the processes we have where we test code thoroughly, someone else inspects my code, I inspect their code, that kind of thing. Be sure to ask a lot of questions, like everything you're wondering, ask it to the boss or the colleagues. Make sure to not leave any questions unanswered, because I've heard that there's nothing worse than someone who's arrogant, someone who's new, who thinks they're too good to ask questions, because how else will you know? There are some things that you just can't figure out on your own when you're programming. It's better to be annoying and ask too many questions than be arrogant. And if you're still scared about coming across annoying, which I was in the beginning, I would use a method called bulk questions, which is when you, during your day, you write down on a piece of paper all the questions you get, and then whenever your boss walks past, you run through 4 or 5 questions at the same time with him or her, and it's way better than interrupting them every 10 minutes, because usually questions don't always need to be answered instantly, and if you get stuck, you could move on to something else temporarily and then hop back into the problem whenever your boss or colleague is available for answering your questions. And particularly during my first week, I had to ask a lot of questions all the time, and now I don't have to ask as many questions because I've asked them before and I know, and I'm very happy I asked those questions in the beginning, because now I don't have to ask that many questions and I do things properly all the time. I'm still asking questions, but it's a normal work environment. It's an open office area, and we talk to each other, and everyone's asking questions all the time. Another piece of advice I would give when you're sort of going through your first week is to try to really put some effort into reading and understanding the code you're maintaining, because as I said before, you're most likely going to read and maintain someone else's code. So read it, put some effort into understanding it, and then after you've understood it, start writing your own code. Because in the beginning I would be too eager to write my own code, so I wouldn't actually read and understand the code first, and that could introduce new bugs. Things could be implemented in the wrong way. So put a lot of effort into understanding how things actually work, and then start developing your code. Even if it will slow you down, it will make sure that everything you write will be it'll be to a higher standard, essentially. Most software engineer work and most coding work is related to maintaining someone else's code. Now in school, at least for me, the only thing they would teach me would be how to build brand new code, how to create things from scratch. And that's something we very rarely do as software developers. And in my case, I've only ever been maintaining someone else's code. And so I was going to dedicate this section of the video on how to actually think when it comes to maintaining code that someone else has wrote. So this is my own framework that I've created myself, because school didn't give it to me, on how to maintain someone else's code. So the first thing you need to do, because most likely if you're tasked with maintaining someone else's code, you'll have a bug list, a bug tracker of things that you need to fix. Pick an easy bug, something that seems easy to fix for you, that you're capable of. Fully understand the bug you need to fix, reproduce it so that you know how to actually make the bug happen, and then spend a long time, I'm talking hours and hours, maybe even days, understanding the code related to that bug, how it works, how the person who's developed it, how they were thinking, what sort of their thought patterns were when they were developing the software, how the bug could have appeared, that kind of thing. Put a lot of time into that before you write the solution to the bug, because the things we learn in school are of no use to this. When we're fixing bugs, maintaining someone else's code, we don't have to put so much effort into, well, we don't have to do any of the things we do when we develop something from scratch, for example, understanding users, that kind of thing, because we're just fixing the bug. And then after you've understood and reproduced the bug and understood the code, at least to I would say a very good level, then it's time to write your own code and fix the bug. And gracefully add your own code in a smooth way so it integrates nicely. Like, look at the naming convention. How are variables named? How are things written? Make your code similar to the way the program already works so that everything is coherent and works in a good way. And that's all you need to maintain someone else's code. And those are things I wish I knew when I started my first week. So I put that in this video, hoping it would be valuable to you. And that moves us on to the next section of this video, which is so important. It's actually, I would say, maybe even more important than the code we write. And I've already touched a bit about it in the beginning. And that is the importance of building relationships with our colleagues and getting to know them. I wouldn't have put this in the video if it wasn't that important. It's so important that we spend time with colleagues, because if we don't become we need to become a liked, trusted, and known person in the company, because we won't have any use of our hard work if we're not actually appreciated and actually known by our colleagues. Go to lunch with them. I remember a couple of days ago, there was one colleague I hadn't talked that much to, and I was having lunch at the same time as him, and we were just talking about his car for the entire lunch, and now suddenly we're pretty good friends because I put the half hour into getting to know him. So it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it gives so much back, and it's nice making friends, being able to trust each other, and it's easier for you to integrate into the team, and you become a more valuable team player. Now, in my case, I'm doing a summer internship, which is in its nature, it's time limited, so it ends at the end of summer when university begins again for me. If I have really good relationship with everyone and everyone likes me and I'm part of the team, they will probably miss me when I'm gone, and I'll in the future have a work opportunity there. So if you're also doing a summer internship or some kind of internship, then put some effort into getting to know everyone, become appreciated, because it will pay you back tenfold. This section of the video is about handling mistakes that you will inevitably make when you're starting off as a programmer. And if you make a mistake, don't worry, everyone does it. I've made countless mistakes so far, none of them fatal yet, none of them particularly serious, but there is one that kind of stands out, and that was when during my first week, I was, by the third day, I had added a bunch of new features and fixed a bunch of bugs, but I'd put them in the same commit for Git, meaning that they weren't organized properly, which basically meant them quite useless. After my colleagues saw that I had made this mistake, I owned up to it immediately, which we need to do. It's like, yes, I did this. I messed up. I should have done better. I didn't know. Basically, we need to be honest. And anyways, and I obviously owned up to the mistake. I said that, okay, I know this wasn't done properly. I didn't know better. My colleagues actually helped me out to set it straight, and I had to spend about 2 or 3 hours correcting the mistake, making sure that each bug and feature request was in its own commit. You will screw up. It's very hard programming. There are a lot of things to think about. You will forget things, just like I did when it came to this, the thing that happened with the version control. But if you own up to it, and if you build relationship with your colleagues, you will be helped, and everyone will understand, and it will be easy and smooth sailing, and you won't have to be feel guilty or shame for committing these mistakes. Now imagine if I hadn't actually put any effort into socializing with my colleagues at this point, and no one knew me, and I was kind of this ghost hanging around in the office, then it would have probably not gone as smoothly as it did. So this really illustrates the point of be honest about your mistakes, but more importantly, build a good relationship with your colleagues. It's particularly important for us coders, because I know we're usually introverts. We like being by ourselves, but it's so valuable to actually have these connections with the people we work with. And that's my full guide to your first coding job. That's literally everything I've learned over the past month distilled into this video, so that you can learn it in 10, 15, however long this video will be. And if you watched this far, it was probably valuable to you. And if you want to help me out, you can click the like button and share this with a friend. You can also subscribe to the channel. All are things I would really appreciate, and it would help me out. If you're an experienced coder, put your suggestions in the comments below, things that us newbies can think about. And if you really like this video, if you watched this far, you'll probably want to watch this video, which is about 5 life-saving lessons that I learned during my first week as a programmer, which is actually the most watched video on the channel. I recorded it during my 3rd day as a programmer, I think, and it's a good watch. I like watching it because I've come far since then, but it's still a very good video. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.